So you have to focus, instead of predicting, and all these methods of predicting, on being robust or perhaps anti-fragile. Gain from randomness, gain from error, and try to identify what gains from randomness and gain from error. So this is a book. Now, you map it to everything. But I wrote this book in a way to prevent any reviewer from being able to skim it. You see? And so far, no reviewer got these points. See what I'm talking about? This is the core. I started the book with this. No reviewer got them, except for one, all right? It's a technical book, visibly dressed in easy language, but if you're a mathematician or you're a scientist, you get it right away. You see, and then they're starting to get it right away, all right? But people are professional reviewers, they completely lost in it. And I make sure that, let me give you the chapter titles if you want to be amused, to realize why reviewers are never gonna get it. Like after the prologue, where the idea is clear in the prologue, history written by the losers. Never marry the rock star. Tell them I love some randomness. The souk and the office building, all right? Time and fragility. The philosopher's stone and its inverse. So I mean, they're not going to be able to pick it up, all right? So it's, you know, the other books are written exactly the same style, by the way. The other two books, and it worked. So you bypass the middleman, the reviewer, and you go straight to the consumers, okay? So this is the book. So it's composed of 7 different books, 7 different topics that apply this. First topic, the most interesting one, is on evolution. Evolution is long randomness. Think about it, if you have 10 offspring, you're never gonna have improvement of the species if you don't have some randomness in the environment that differentiate between them, agree? And then also genetic drift, some randomness along the line, you see? So evolution likes randomness. It's a problem. Why is it a problem? Well, because since the Enlightenment, we have some social justice. Can you reconcile? Of course we can reconcile. And that's sort of the challenge I take in my book 1. Where entrepreneurs, and here you're in the tech business, entrepreneurs, really, the system improves thanks to the failure of entrepreneurs. And then I learned something in biology from a gentleman who, you remember Hormesis, system gets stronger? He discovered one thing, that no, system doesn't get stronger. Some parts of the business under a shock, the weak parts get cleaned up in you. You know, the restaurant business, as a business, is composed of restaurants. So layer restaurant business, the restaurants are fragile for the business to work well, to be robust. You agree? Bankruptcies help clean up the system, therefore the system becomes robust because the parts are fragile. It's the same thing in your human body. Cells need to be fragile for you to experience hormesis improvement. Because when you starve yourself, weak cells go first. And then within cells, protein. He modeled it, Antoine Dalchin, published the paper in Genes. If you go to my website, I have all these papers linked to this concept. So realize evolution loves volatility, okay? And this is rarely mapped like this. So in this representation, so I had to do some mathematical work on that. So this is the book 1, but of course it's written in poetic level. What kills me makes others stronger, you see? And then why do you have the difference? You know that since the Enlightenment, we talk about I, the individual. Before that, we never. You're collective. The tribe, the collective, you die for the tribe. This is why you have suicide bombers. You know, they don't consider themselves as a unit. But now we have a modern society, and you're not gonna commit harakiri for the sake of the computer industry to get better by failing. So we need the mechanism to make failure acceptable. Well, you seem to give social acceptability to failure, but not in other businesses, certainly not in Japan, and not in Europe. When you fail, you're a loser, you see. So it prevents people from doing these things. So we have to find a mechanism to make people fail to improve the system. That's sort of book 1. Book 2, I'm going to go through the books, and then during the Q&A I can answer whatever. Divert you into whatever I haven't covered, okay? Book 2, I talk about modernity. The problem is, look how smooth these surfaces are, okay? Look how smooth this wall, okay? Nothing is fractal in here. Look outside. You see the green outside? You see how fractal it is? Okay, complete different world, you see? So you're psychologically, we like variation. We like variation. But modernity doesn't know it, wants to make us comfortable. You see? Modernity wants your children on Prozac to iron their mood swings. So the problem is that they don't realize that there's a difference between what I call the cat and washing machine. What's the difference? That the mechanical doesn't need stressors to operate. The organic communicates with the environment via stressors. You see, you have to, get stressors, right? This is how the information system. So the problem is if you stabilize everything to make everything comfortable like we have here, what happens to you? You get weaker. Your bones get weaker if you spend time in bed. Your system gets weaker. And we sort of understand it because I'm sure you have a gym here, no? So, but there's a contradiction. You have a gym, I'm sure, and you have elevators. You have a gym, yet you have smooth surfaces. And then you go to the nurse and they give you antibiotics, no? Okay, so you understand very quickly. So there's something about modernity, try to make people comfortable that weakens them. Instead, so I call that interventionism. And the person over-intervening in a system is called fragilista. And typically they fragilize the system twofold. First, by making it too comfortable, becomes weak. And two, by not being there, intervening when needed. Mr. Greenspan, you've heard of him. He inherited the nature, he would have made sure we have 68.7 degrees year round. You get the idea? He wanted to do the same for the economy. It fragilizes the economy because without stressors you don't have, you have like flammable material accumulating and risks accumulating on the surface and then blows up. So what you have is very stable but then blows up rather than something volatile. Volatile things, markets need some volatility because that's the way information is conveyed. You can't stifle information. Take, for example, democracy. It needs volatility. And I compared on the Black Swan, Syria, which you've heard of Syria, you hear about it now, which has zero political volatility, to Italy, that had a lot of it. And which country do you think is safer? I had a lot of letters saying Syria was safer than Italy. Right? They didn't understand. Okay, Syria had zero, political volatility till we had the volatility. And you get the idea. That was on the Black Swan. And now I'm taking on Saudi Arabia. I mentioned Syria and Saudi Arabia in the Black Swan. And then, of course, Egypt. Look what happened. You overstabilize. So this is interventionism. This is modernity. So I go through that. And the problem is you're never there for the big, like in medicine, you're never there for the big things. Now, book 3, I talk about prediction. Forget about it. It's not interesting. And then I introduce Fat Tony. Have Fat Tony, a character who smells fragility and makes a buck with those who, lulled by a false sense of security, making pennies, boom, blow up once in a while. Okay? So this is like Fat Tony, introduce Fat Tony. And then I introduce Seneca by defining, let me redraw the convex for you to see the link. If I have a payoff like this, I'm here, all right? Oh, sorry, it's convex. Let me make it very convex. This is payoff, this is variation. We're here, the market is here. Okay? If the market goes up $1, I make 2 million. The market goes down $1, same amount, I lose 100,000. I'm convex. Well, more upside than downside. Well, the person who figured it out is Seneca, the Roman philosopher. And he was really Roman. They hated intellect. They liked practical things. And he was the wealthiest man in the world at the time. And he figured out that you're harmed, you see, when you're very wealthy because you have more downside than upside. You're fragile. And every morning he would wake up, try to convince himself that he's very poor. Once in a while, like fakes a shipwreck. And then I discovered all this wealth. So he wanted to make sure that if he loses all his money, which happened at the time, he wouldn't be harmed, you see, because he, so that's sort of like the idea. And so I have a discussion of Seneca, who to me is probably the greatest thinker. Academics never got it because academics think that Stoics are people who have no emotion. In fact, he didn't want to have negative emotion, more upside than downside. And I define antifragility as more upside than downside. Something you may like now, my central chapter, I just put on the web today a distillation of that. My central book is on discovery, tinkering as compared to rational top-down. Tinkering is like optionality, how it likes, bottom-up tinkering. You have little to lose, a lot to gain, all right? As a process, we show that the evidence that a lot of things we think came from science, in fact, came from heuristics of practice. And I do a random simulation. Today is an article on Edge, all right, where I have that simulation. It upset a lot of people, where you show that two brothers, one has knowledge, the other just tinkering, and how much further you can go by tinkering and have more upside than downside, aggressive tinkering, as compared to someone who knows where he's going. It's ideological. And effectively, you look at history of technology, and when you look at definition of technology as defined by Harvard or all these places that it's good to drop out from, as one of your leaders have, they think that technology comes from science. Nonsense. Science comes largely from technology. You see, even in some cases, sometimes you find predecessors, like Euclidean geometry. They were building cathedrals and didn't know how to divide. They probably thought that Euclid was some Greek poet or something. They didn't understand, all right? But then later on, we find matches, you see. Industrial revolution by thinkers. So jet engine, thinkers, engineers knew how to function, and then later on you found a theory. You fit the theory back to the past. I call it lecturing birds how to fly. Upsets academia at all levels when I show formal knowledge versus wild optional knowledge that gains from uncertainty. If you're tinkering, you want maximum exposure to uncertainty. Well, the university is a prison, you see. You're a prison of a curriculum, all that nonsense. So, so this is a chapter that really gets university people angry. All right, they like emotionally angry. So particularly statist university system people in the UK, even more from my talk. Yes?
So you're referring to your Edge essay that you put out this morning?
Sorry?
You put out an essay in Edge?
Yes,
yes. I think it's interesting to this group because largely research people in this building.
I see.
By tinkering, you're actually creating a situation where you're able to tinker and take advantage of basically positive black swans.
Exactly. Look, what happens is that there's a theorem that people don't realize, and it's as follows. Is anybody of you here into probability? Okay, any probability distribution that's skewed right. Okay, take the log normal. What's the mean of a log normal? It has a variance in it. So you increase the variance, what happens to the mean? Increases. If you have little to lose and lot to gain, you see, the mean of a distribution that's bounded on the left and open on the right, the mean depends on a variance. In other words, you inject uncertainty in the system, your expected return goes up. The exact opposite of a plane ride. Take a plane ride, I'm going to New York tomorrow. 6 hours? All right. I'm lucky if I make it 5.5 hours. All right. If you inject uncertainty in a system, it's not going to make the plane ride 1 hour. But it can take 2 weeks to get there. You see, September 11 or something. You get the idea, any uncertainty. So the systems that are fragile are defined as their mean degrades when you inject uncertainty, and the mean increases when you inject uncertainty. And that's pretty much the gist of that article. The thing is, when I talk to probability people, they get it right away. That any distribution that's skewed right has a mean, like log normal has mean is 1/2 the sigma square, plus something, all right? So, but when you talk to normal people, it's hard for them to understand why uncertainty is good. So you have to use a lot of patience for that. So this is sort of like the Edge essay and my chapter here, which is vastly more aggressive than the Edge essay, you see? In my chapter here, I talk about frauds, all right? A lot of things that are frauds, effectively, that anything that compresses uncertainty into channeling it is not very good. And you see, obviously, a lot of situations like the Black-Scholes formula, stuff like that, that were developed in a sophisticated form by operators and later on claimed by professors, as coming from them, because they can't imagine that knowledge can come in any other way. And in it, of course, we have the two tensions. And he who discovered that problem, you know, you've heard of creative destruction? People assume it's an economist called Schumpeter. How can anything intelligent come out of an academic economist? Impossible. Got to be someone else. That's the rule. If it's attributed to an economist, it has to come from a philosopher, all right? Non-academic, Nietzsche, of course, who was then semi-academic, all right, at the time, creative destruction. And he said that Socrates destroyed the balance between Apollonian, which is reasoning, and Dionysian, which is that deep, dark force in us, because he made it disrespectable to do something you don't understand. He made the unintelligible seem unintelligent. And who's going to debate Socrates? My fat Tony friend. And what is, as you can expect, think of a guy from Brooklyn, all right, who makes his killings squeezing people, debating Socrates. You know who's going to win, all right? Fat Tony wins, all right, by the debate. But it's he has to, you know, abide by philosophical. Yeah, but he out Socrates by cross-examining him. So this is sort of my book on innovation, the one I like the most. And I have that distillation of the article, but I go much deeper in here, you know, against the sucker mom, touristification, educational system. We got, you know, there's something about the educational system people don't realize. Do you think that education raises wealth in a country? It raises wealth for a family. It stabilizes income, actually, for a family. It doesn't even raise wealth. Education comes typically, if you take countries that are rich, have a degree of education came after. You see? You get rich, and then suddenly it's epiphenomenal, the thing that is caused by education. Only people who tinker here, like you guys, understand it. But if you go on the East Coast, Harvard Square, put to death right there, you know, for saying something like that.